Hey folks, this is Walker, one of the two hosts of Idio Talk. Just wanted to let you know that this week's episode is part 2 of one conversation that Zach and I had about the Radiohead album Amnesiac. This week, we're giving you the part of the convo where we break down the album song by song. But last week, we talked about the album's background and our various opinions about it, and a lot of other stuff unrelated to Radiohead that was really fun and funny. So make sure you go back and listen to that if you haven't already. It really puts this week's conversation in context. That's it. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you do that. Leave us a review, rate us, all that good stuff. And in the meantime, enjoy this week's episode of Idio Talk. So as we get into the tracks here, just talking about this opener. Now, last album, Kid A, I went and threw a big claim out there and said I thought that was not only the best Radiohead album opener, but maybe the best album opener of any album. I believe that this album opens with a similarly bold statement, although I think in a very different vein than the last album. So the first album track on Amnesiac is Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box. Did I get that title right?
That's right.
All right. And it goes a little something like this.
It's just one of those days where you don't want to wake up. Everything is fucked. Everybody sucks. You don't really know why, but you want to justify.
So
Ripping someone's head off.
so very different.
Well, no, we talked about, though, that Tom gets angry about the media and political landscape.
That's true. That's true. Listeners, now I kind of just want to listen to this, though.
Think about it, where? Letting shit slip.
Oh, you'll be living with a fat lip. And America fell in love.
Gosh, and how dated is this song? Nowadays, it's all about the he said, she said, they bullshit.
Oh. It's all about the non-binary bullshit.
But I'm not saying that's bullshit. I'm just talking about people.
Yeah, I'm saying no matter your gender, I don't want to put up with it. All right, folks. I'm sorry about that. Here we go. Oh, God. Okay, we got to get out of this. We're in a second chorus now. All right. Fuck. Limp Bizkit. Such a bad thing to hear when you're expecting to hear Radiohead, wouldn't you say?
Totally. Yes, absolutely.
So the first track off this album, it's not actually Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit. Because it would be weird if on a Radiohead album, if they were like, we're going to open this one with a Limp Bizkit song that hasn't been released yet at the time. But they instead open it with a Radiohead song, and I think that was a wise choice. I like it better. And it's called Packed, spelled P-A-C-K-T, like sardines, as in the fish. That's not part of the title, in a crushed tin box. Already starting different.
Yeah, we're focused on the percussion. You were talking about everything in its right place, the album opener to Kid A. The focus is certainly on the piano and synthesizer in that song. So we have a companion piece, I believe, as far as openers go, but the focus is on the percussion, and we have 2 drum tracks going.
Yeah, we have this pots and pans track going that sounds to me like it is an acoustic instrument. And then we have what I'm guessing is probably a Johnny Greenwood sequenced drum track on the drum machine or synthesizer. Could have been any of them, but whenever it shows them like playing stuff live, he always seems to be the one programming the electronic drums.
When you can hear the bass just kind of sliding solitary note. So already we clearly have 4 members of the 5-member band Radiohead contributing, possibly a 5th. I just do not know what Ed would be doing. It doesn't mean he's not. I hear some feedback coming in.
Yeah.
So Walker, you said pots and pans sort of drum track. Phil did actually find this drum beat and this backbeat, which is something I do want to talk about a little bit more. By experimenting on a pot that you boil water in.
Oh, okay. And you listen to that. I'm going to turn it up. Oh,
so they faded it out.
Just when he stopped doing that.
It comes back.
And then... Yeah, it's really... This song, I mean, it's so simple with the non-percussive instruments. Mm-hmm. It's doing this melody that sounds like it's on a synth. Now live they kind of beef this one up and play it with electric guitars. Mm-hmm. And it's cool. I get why they do that. I this is one of the cases where I prefer the more restrained album version.
Agreed. But I think those live performances are so educational because you can see how a song may have been conceived by a band that was originally a guitar-driven band and then rendered down into something just, if not more, as I would argue, more interesting.
Yeah.
But it is really cool to see the sort of two sides.
Absolutely.
It makes it more approachable. I don't really know how, even if I had the music in front of me, how I would play this song on a guitar rhythmically.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and also, like, one thing that's great about Radio... There we go. There's that pots and pans. It's so cool how that starts the song and then gets blended into all these other percussion tracks that like take it over.
And that, splitting the beat and throwing in additional beats, even though the time signature itself doesn't change, is something that happens across the front four of almost all of these tracks in one way or the other. They don't do it on the drums on every track. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but if I could just kind of talk about the percussion right here. So from, listeners, start the song over, turn off our stupid voices. But from second 15 to 26, each snare attack, we'll just call the striking of the pot sounding a snare, has been preceded by 2 kick drum attacks, right? And at second number 26, the snare drum attack is preceded by 4 kick drum attacks. So just to simplify that a little bit, the kick drum would be your backbeat. And so our brains interpret this as an even number of 8 notes leading up to the snare, right? And all that's been distributed by this 4 kick pattern is a half note grouping. So the primary beat, the quarter note, remains unaffected. What does all that mean? I don't know. What it means, listeners, is that a listener patting their foot can continue to do so uninterrupted despite the changes in meter. So that's what's so cool that Radiohead do, particularly on this album, is you can find the beat, you can continue tapping your foot, just like in songs that are in an unconventional like Morning Bell, for instance, right? But what they do on this song is they just keep splitting that beat and adding, like a lot of times people might call them ghost notes or something like that. But your meter never changes. So that's what great songwriters do, is they throw in something for the people that are really focused on all these interesting, really, really weird micro examples, but you could still tap your foot to it.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, that's, I mean, and they somehow do this without ever it sounding too busy, which is cool, which I think is another trick of that is really in the mixing. Because they keep adding these other drum tracks.
Thank you, Nigel.
Right. Not everything goes through the whole song. And it doesn't ever cut off abruptly. He'll fade it into the background and fade in something else so seamlessly that you don't even notice until you've listened to it 100,000 times.
Yeah. Well, very well said. One other thing, too, that I know we talked about with Everything in Its Right Place. We talked about the... what is the tonal center? What key is that song in? Is it a minor key? Is it this is not the case with Pact. Pact is in the key of D Dorian, which for our scales and modes heads out there, D Dorian is the second scale of C major. So you could say the song is in C major or D Dorian, right? But Dorian has a major or a minor flavor to it. And so D Dorian is like otherwise related to like the D natural minor scale or D melodic minor scale, but they differ in just one note. All that to say, Everything in Its Right Place was in C Phrygian, which is the 52nd most popular key amongst Phrygian keys, and Phrygian is way low on the list. So you have 7 modes, and then within that mode, it's the least popular. Everything in Its Right Place, there's not another song on earth that I think sounds like it. This song while still being a companion, it's in a major key, or it has a minor flavor to it.
Well, almost like a blues riff,
Very much so.
or like a power chord song.
Very much so. And I mean, just we're talking about tapping your foot. You know, it's intuitively an easier song to grasp. Very, very wise choice. I could see myself wanting to double down and going Everything in Its Right Place Part 2, and it just wouldn't work, right? So I think the way they pick the companion pieces are just so brilliant. We don't have to do that with every song, comparing it to the other, but
We don't have to. We get to.
this song certainly bears that comparison, though, because
Sure.
it's an album opener of this new era of Radiohead. And do you have anything you want to say in the lyrics, Walker?
That's so funny that I just pulled them up because I do think that. Well, just to stay on music for a second, I do want to talk about the lyrics. And I think that we're talking about this song to such an extra degree because it's, we're setting the table here with for what the rest of the album is going to be. I think this is really an interesting opener choice because I think it is one of the less indicative songs of what the whole of this album sounds like.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't. Now this is something that I don't know how I can articulate it. I just think it works because it does not sound
Well articulated.
yeah, great. I don't know why I didn't believe in myself.
You got this, brother.
Yeah, thanks. I know how to use words to convey ideas about Radiohead.
In Espanol.
It's not out of place.
Totally.
But this album it has these more electronic focused tracks, but I would say it's less electronically focused than Kid A, as we will hear and as we discussed in the background of the album. So I think it's kind of interesting to open with this one that is this song is so compressed, and I don't mean that in the sense of the way it's used in music studios or on the mixing board. I just mean that it's like there's these like really tight electronic drum sounds.
Yeah.
There's the melody on the synth. There's a couple little guitar noises. There's one vocal track basically that's kind of like coldly auto-tuned. It's like it's a weird antiseptic kind of like small tense sounding little song. Kind of a mean sounding little song, you know? And from here, as we'll see, I just think the album really, really opens up a lot. And so I think it's kind of a bold and cool choice to put this thing at the front that I do think kind of makes you go, oh, okay, Kid A Part 2 a little bit.
Yes, very much so.
And then as we'll get into, the next song I think is very much not Kid A Part 2.
Sure. But I mean, I remember that I was hooked though when I the first time I was listening to this album. I remember, like I said, expectations were low. Bad on me, but whatever. But I mean, it is a great song. And I don't honestly remember how much Everything in Its Right Place, like where that landed in the, in my top 10 or whatever at that time. I know I'd heard Kid A first, but I mean, just as an album opener, it's a great song and it really hooks. I hadn't thought of it in the context that you just said though, that it's not as much, it's maybe not as indicative of what the rest of the album sounds like. But that's a really interesting way to think about it. I had not thought of it before that way.
Yeah, I mean, do you agree?
I do, yeah.
But yet I wouldn't change. It's not a note where I'm like, and I think they should have put something. It's a great opener. I think it's a really great opener too because of how sparse it is, and that it just starts with those drums, and that you're tapping your foot to it. But it's an interesting choice.
Yeah, and I think
it's also, I should say, I feel like I haven't said I love this song. It is one of my favorite songs on the album.
Totally.
Such a great song.
Absolutely. The garbling of the voice is definitely I wouldn't even say a callback, but is reminiscent of Everything in Its Right Place. But yeah, I mean, when you dissect the songs, and we're not going to go through the level of detail that I just did with Backbeat and all that necessarily on every song. I think these first two certainly bear trying to break them open as much as we can to satisfy Radiohead fans that like technical detail. And I think we owe it to all of Radiohead to talk about those on these first two. But what's so interesting is that like the auto-tune effect and sort of just that low bass and synth, you go, oh, okay, that's like Everything in Its Right Place. But as we just talked about from a key and a beat perspective, it's actually quite simple. So that's all I got on this song.
We'll just talk about the lyrics real quick because I think that this song, as far as a mission statement of an opener, it's very, very much in line with the songwriting approach that is on this album and on Kid A, where Tom has all these like scraps of lyrics and ideas, and they're being chosen and then kind of placed where he can apply them. I don't think that his approach, as we discussed last time, was to sit down and write whole songs. He's got kind of all these stanzas floating around, and he's putting them in their right place. And
nice.
And thank you. In this one,
like the song.
Yeah. The lyrics to this song are just basically a couple sentences repeated with slight variations. It's after years of waiting, nothing came. As your life flashed before your eyes, you realize I'm a reasonable man. Get off my case. And then just more. The only other lyric that is after years of waiting, nothing came. And you realize you're looking in the wrong place.
My favorite part of the song when he
really
sings
good.
that part. Yeah, you know what, Walker? This song reminds me of, you were talking about, maybe it was even going back to our first episode, but how Tom York, very similar to like someone like David Byrne or Beach Boys, help me out.
Brian Wilson.
I think that was a really excellent comparison. But, you know, even as we get into what is arguably, you know, their most complex, inspired era, that style sort of still persists. And I think actually songs from the Bends and from Pablo Honey probably have more words in them. But you sort of compare that to the sophistication of the band, and the songs themselves lyrically are getting shorter and shorter. It's a very interesting parallel. What this song reminds me of, again, as a companion to Kid A, is maybe a little bit more scaled down and focused. We're not talking so broadly about just in the song alone. What it reminds me of is waiting in line at the grocery store, and you know, you have 3 people in front of you. You don't really have to be anywhere. Nobody's really going that slow. I can only speak for myself. Sometimes those are the most, Zach, calm down, it's okay, moments ever, you know, where you're just getting patient. You have to remind yourself, I'm a reasonable man, or whatever. The person behind you, though, you want to look at them, get off my case, even though they're just standing there. It doesn't have to be the grocery store. Any mundane activity where you have to function in society and be tolerant and courteous, and you know, and then fortunately you're not the asshole that, you know, makes a big scene or whatever, and you go, oh, well, thank goodness that I'm rational or whatever.
Yeah.
But your inner monologue might be quite irrational. And I'm being very vulnerable by admitting this, but I think a lot of folks could probably relate.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear because it's clearly good songwriting because we both picture different versions of the same thing.
Okay.
I thought, I mean, the title is helpful, you know, I like it's such a harsh title for something as kind of dreamy sounding as after years of waiting, nothing came. And then the song is called Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box. I pictured you're on the subway going to work.
Yes.
And because you're going to work, you're already in a bad mood. But your inner monologue is like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
We all don't want to be here.
Right. We all don't want to be here. So why the fuck are you doing this thing that is inconveniencing me personally? I am holding up my end of the societal contract.
I am a reasonable man.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really, really good songwriting that it puts the listener so much in the mind of the narrator.
Yeah. Good job, Radiohead.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was Amnesiac. And no, just kidding. That was just the first song, listeners. This next one, I say we want to let it breathe for a minute, and then I have questions for you. Track 2 on this album, one that I think is more indicative of what the kind of the feel of the majority of this album will be. This is Pyramid Song. I feel like maybe we should start talking a little bit, but there is a part coming up that I want to draw attention to when it happens.
Yeah, listeners, we're still here. I would like to let it breathe just for a little bit longer. Is that okay?
Listeners, we are still here. We just want to
here.
let you know. Listen to Tom, listeners.
Nothing to fear, nothing to
Here we go.
We're almost here. It's like jazz, Walker. It's like jazz.
So, listeners, that song makes you wait for 2 minutes before it kicks in there. I think very worth the wait. I think Tom's voice.
So we listened to 2 minutes of it.
We listened to 2 minutes of that song.
Wow, 2 minutes of paradise.
Just a couple quick observations. I think Tom's voice sounds the best that it has ever sounded. I absolutely adore what is happening here in the orchestral section, conducted by Johnny Greenwood, where the strings are mimicking Tom's vocal part right there. So it's doing another echo of what he was doing with the ooh-oohs. They do this also in Everything in Its Right Place. I'm pretty curious, and maybe when I kick it over to you, maybe you have insight into this, maybe you don't. I wonder if Tom wrote the melody and then Johnny composes around it, or if they had this music and Johnny wrote this part for the orchestra and Tom composes his vocal melody around it. Do you have any insight into that?
I do, yeah. So, oh god, I'm looking for it in my notes because it's a little bit further ahead. But Tom recorded this in the Copenhagen sessions. Guys, when they recorded Amnesiac and Kid A, they did not do all of it in one location, but they did do it all in the same session. So they bounced around between different locations. Tom, this was recorded in January of 1999, piano and vocals, and Johnny did not add his string arrangement until almost or over a year later.
Okay.
In March of 2000, when he was...
Which you can hear those strings in the background.
Take a guess what song from Kid A he was recording his orchestral strings for.
How to Disappear Completely?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Tom didn't lay this down again. This was a very... I should note, Phil also didn't add these flourishes. Not as much later as Greenwood's part, but it was not the whole group's in the studio. This song, Walker, as amazing as it is, and I do have a lot to go through. I do want to hear your questions, though, was what broke the ice, so to speak, for Tom and his writer's block and getting things. So this is the second song from Amnesiac. This was recorded before almost everything else on both Kid A and this album.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Can
you imagine that? You have writer's block and then you sit down and write Pyramid Song?
That's fucking crazy. I mean... yeah. Do you love this song?
I do love this song. It's a grower for sure.
It really is. I don't know that this is one that has sneakily become one of my favorite Radiohead songs as the years progress.
Interesting. This is one that jumped out to me. Just like I said, Packed. Not every song jumped out to me though upon my initial listen, as we'll go through. To hear Packed Like Sardines when I had low expectations for an album, and then Pyramid Song when I listened to this album, sitting in my car while it was raining, my mind was blown. Now, then in the subsequent years, I always knew this was a great song. I really short shrifted this period of Radiohead, and that doesn't mean that I wouldn't listen to it or whatever. It just wouldn't be my go-to. And going back to it, throughout this project and over, like I have over the last few years, we've mentioned several times Brad Osborne's book, Everything in Its Right Place. There's a whole chapter devoted to this song.
Okay.
So direct quote right here: "No other song in perhaps Radiohead's entire catalog has generated as much speculation. And I wanted to talk about some of the possible prevalent theories, but I do know you had some questions. Would you like to get those in first?
Let's see. I mean, my question really was, what the hell is going on time signature wise?
Okay.
Because this is another one of those songs that I think is a lot simpler than it sounds in terms of its meter, but it's very odd to me. I mean, we won't replay, but just to hear what he's playing on the piano here. So that sounds like an extra beat, but then when the drums come in, it sounds like it's counting to 4. So what's going on? Can you tell me what they're doing here?
We could just pull out a little bit on the rhythm, because it just kind of builds to that. So, and the theories about this song do involve the rhythm. But initially, and this goes from 2001, the year of the release of the song, till 2013, when Tom York gave a specific interview explaining this song. I'm not sure if that was on Marin or on NPR, but regardless, in that 12-year span, one of the theories was that this song was inspired by jazz musician Charles Mingus. He's known as the Angry Man of Jazz. He was prone to outbursts and violence, but a prolific jazz musician, but a very unstable genius. And then the other prevailing theory was...
so not like Trump.
No, nothing like that.
Who was famously called himself a stable genius.
Oh my God.
Sorry. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, he tweeted, "I am a very stable genius" at one point. So please continue. I actually have also, just so you know, I have the Mingus song that it was inspired by pulled up on here.
Oh, excellent.
I read
Okay.
about that a little bit too.
Sure. I mean,
we'll just play it in the background.
Let's go ahead.
This is called "Freedom" by Charles Mingus, and it was very interesting to hear because you kind of, well, you'll hear it, but you're kind of like, oh, I get it. It also couldn't be more different than Radiohead's Pyramid Song, but it's But please feel free to speak. I'll just let this play in the background.
No problem. So the other prevailing theory was regarding the lyrics, that it's basically pulling from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So the next thing Mr. Osborne talks about in his book is, why is there so much speculation? Is it the repeated chord progressions? Is it the lyrical declamations? It is interesting compared to Pact, right? We have a stripped down instrumentation through voice, piano, and then the drums. That is something that they do very nicely on this album, is that you'll get a track with some level of digital trickery, right? And then you'll immediately shift to something that is maybe more traditional instrumentation. Certainly the case with these two tracks. So just to recap again, the four main theories are the Tibetan/Egyptian Books of the Dead, Charles Mingus' song that we're listening to right now, Freedom, a complicated intertextual link between the song Freedom, clapping song by Shirley Ellis, and then Tom Waits' Clap Hands. I don't know if you've listening to the
No.
Tom Waits song, and Egyptian funeral rites. So in the year 2013, Tom York gave an unusually candid interview in which he sort of dispelled a lot of the mystery. And do you mind if I just read that quote?
No,
real quick?
please.
So I'm not going to do Tom's voice, but
Just imagine.
we're in
listeners.
Copenhagen, yeah?
Oh,
No,
so you are
sorry.
going to do it.
We were in Copenhagen. We just started recording the first session after OK Computer, and we were all deeply dysfunctional, especially me. And there was an exhibition. They had a whole Egyptian section where they went on about religious beliefs and stuff, and they had these figures in these little boats ready to go wherever it is they were going to go. We were having a really shitty session, but we got in the morning afterwards, sat down, played these chords, and I just said, hey, that's nice. Made a note of it, and then wrote words, and it was very quick. We recorded the drumming a few months later, and it sounded like something from a Charles Mingus record. It was just one of those weird things of when you make a record, especially you get to a flow, and that was just part of the flow. We were going through this bad period where nothing was going right, and this was a big breakthrough. But I never expected it to be such a popular single. When we play it live, people go nuts for it. And listeners, I can attest to that. As we've covered, I've not seen Radiohead live. Walker has. I don't know if they played this song when he saw them, but it is a fan favorite to pass away to, as we covered in our Q&A,
Yeah.
and also to be played live. They do not really change anything about the recording about the way they play it relative to the recording. That's the end of his quote. He said, people go nuts for it. And we're like, really? Yeah. So the band has a little bit of surprise from it. And then going back to your question, what Tom is referring to there is that in March 1999, the band recorded this. And Johnny Greenwood's string arrangements on this song were recorded a full year later by the orchestra at St. John's in the same sessions for How to Disappear Completely and for Dollars and Cents. Now, we can shift to the rhythm unless you have anything you wanted to add on that.
No, but you know what? It is interesting that you mentioned that it's like such an unusual and surprising single. One thing we didn't cover in the background of this album is that I think we did say in Kid A, they did not release any singles for that album. Very bold, non-commercial move. With Amnesiac, they did release singles, and those singles were this Pyramid song and a song that we haven't listened to yet called Knives Out. And I do think that Pyramid song as a first single, what a wild choice. I love it.
Yeah.
But
I'm really glad
this is a really, I think, like heartbreaking sounding song.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I should have mentioned the music video is one of the things that sort of fed into the speculation. Now, I realize the quote I just said didn't explain A, the part about the rhythm, and B, doesn't explain everything. It's that thing that we've spoken about before, though, where greatly inspired artists can be very pompous, like James Cameron, or they can be a little bit demystifying, like Bob Dylan and like Tom York a little bit in this case, in that, it would be so easy for any individual to imbue some whack, an angel came down and gave me this song or something like that, but it's very humanizing. Now on the rhythm, since I think that's
hit me with it.
So, okay. So again, quoting Mr. Osborne, no other aspect of the song is more contentious, which I find to be funny that it's contentious.
Radiohead fans will tear each other apart over this.
Yeah. And listeners, again, this has to be done for this song. So most commentators focus on the rhythm's palindromic aspects. We'll define that in a second. Yet some go further to speculate on potential meter signatures. The role of swing, I think that's absolutely something you hear. And the drum set's role in either reinforcing or distracting from these structures. I think that's brilliantly said. And then he talks about how he's going to approach it.
But that's what it is, right? Is the drums are playing in swing.
Yes.
Okay. So
we might lose a couple people in this part, but just stick with us. So the heading of this section is called Mod 16 Palindrome. Here's I'm going to read this and then we'll kind of break it down. So though the rhythmic and melodic motifs transcribed, and then he has a picture, listeners, of what looks like a pyramid below in this figure, and each 32 pulses long, the rhythm itself is only 16 pulses long. When those 16 pulses are divided by the 5 attack points, we are left with the maximally even distribution. Parentheses 3 3 4 3 3, the geometry of a pyramid, right? 5 sides, 4 of which have 3 vertices and 1 which has 4. It's hard to miss. And then there's a digital rendering of this. So I would really, really, really encourage people to jump online and to try and put a visual aspect to what I'm going through right here. Then he goes on to say what makes this rhythm so captivating is the ironic tension between its palindromic nature and the maximum individualization of its component beats. Though it is symmetrical, each beat is unique. To understand these and other peculiar mathematical properties of the pyramid song rhythm, we have to understand its archetype. And then he talks about other different examples of this in Cuban music. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there because I think that was probably a little bit difficult to sort of apply an imagery to. But I want to back up and say just kind of how he means palindrome. So I had to do a little bit of extra reading to even try and understand that myself. So palindrome, something like race car or something that
boob.
Forward. Thank you, boob, dad.
Listeners, isn't it great that that's the first time I've spoken in like a full minute to say something that dumb while Zach is saying something this smart?
I really appreciate it because I maybe should have had more palindromes. Mom! So I was talking about the maximally even distribution, and I said parentheses 3 3 4 3 3. That's a palindrome as well. So a palindrome can be numerical or it can be alphanumerical, right? So that is to say, you have an extra beat in there, right? And this goes kind of back to what we were saying with Packed Like Sardines, although a lot more complex and a lot more to break open. You could still tap your foot to this song. You could still sing along. there is something so rhythmically complex to where if you map this song out digitally on a computer of sorts, it will create a pyramid. And the mystery that still endures is, was this intentional? Was it collaborative? Did Johnny Greenwood maybe notice that he could somehow enhance the way Tom York was singing over it to find it? That's kind of like what I like to imagine, is that Tom York...
Wait. But I'm sorry. But it has to be intentional, right? Because each part was recorded separately a year apart. Is it not rhythmically a pyramid until
correct
the full arrangement comes into place? So what Tom York is playing on the piano does not rhythmically create a pyramid. No. It's all of it working in tandem that makes a pyramid?
Yes and no. I mean, what Tom York is playing on the piano in terms of time signature does have the 3-3-4-3-3. I'm sorry, 3-3-3-4-3-3-3.
Okay.
But that isn't, listeners, I'm backing up, 3-3-4-3-3. That isn't something, though, that would be so unusual for somebody just sitting down at a piano to maybe come to. So it is what you said, in that all of the instruments and individuals that contribute to the song working together make it what it is. And what I like to imagine, because Tom York, doesn't read and write in standard notation. You can obviously play the fuck out of a piano and a guitar and a bass. Johnny Greenwood, though, is maybe that extra layer of genius, as we've spoken about. And I think now it's time to add a third member to that in Phil. Because Phil's he picks his spots so beautifully, and it is what makes it what it is. And it's just that thing that we've talked about with other Radiohead songs. How much of it is conscious word painting, for instance, in Paranoid Android or in Electioneering, the way Johnny's playing the scale up and down. Sometimes it's like that had to be planned. Other times I think there's a confluence of events that make something so singularly brilliant. And I think it's a little bit of both in this case. Okay.
That's really, really interesting. A lot of it is over my head, but I appreciate us getting to like a sort of broken down version of it that I can kind of understand what you're saying. I wish that I can't be contentious about this because I'm too dumb.
Oh, Walker, come on. And as the editor, I fully trust in keeping or scaling down what we just went through. I do want to, again, credit where credit is due. Brad Osborne, in his book Everything That's the Right Place, has an entire chapter devoted to this. And I think he does a very good job breaking it down for somebody that maybe has an interest in music and in these theoretical concepts, far better than we can explain on this podcast. But those were the moments that I chose to highlight as maybe the most interesting for a larger audience. And that does not then mean that it all makes sense and clicks at any moment for me either.
No, I mean, I think absolutely it needs to stay. This podcast is about having a variety of approaches to Radiohead's music, and some of it's going to be a little more technical. And I do want to kind of disclose to our listeners at this time, normally this podcast is a improvised and unscripted conversation. We make some notes. We know the album we're going to talk about, etc. There's guideposts. This is the first episode that has been tightly scripted because we are... And even that pause there, right there, where it sounded like I didn't know what I wanted to say and I interrupted myself because I ran out of steam in the middle of a sentence. It's all scripted because if you actually lay out a digital rendering of this episode, it also makes a pyramid.
Oh, I was miming a dick.
Oh, yes.
It makes a giant penis.
It's a pyramid of dicks. And again,
Absolutely.
that part where Zach said it seemed like Zach was thinking something else and we missed each other and then we kind of landed in the all scripted, all
Absolutely.
tightly scripted. I hate to bash on this point. This is a song, Zach, where it's so clear what each person is doing except the handsome man.
Walker,
do you know what he's doing on this song? Because
instrumentation wise,
I want to stick up for Ed here, but there's not real. There's Tom on piano. Phil is playing drums. There is a bass line that comes in when the drums come in. In fact, I bet it's probably a stand-up bass, if I had to guess.
It's very minimal, but it's essential to the song.
But it sounds like maybe a fretless bass to me in this song.
I would agree.
Again, making this song kind of the doppelganger of How to Disappear completely, not just the orchestral section, but also the arrangement within the band. What the fuck is Ed doing?
You know,
What is the handsome man doing other than standing there and saying, "Good job, mate"?
Yeah, I'm not too sure, but I do.
We're never going to get him on this podcast with how much shit we've talked, are we?
Well, we've talked a lot about his looks in a positive way. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I'm sure that makes him feel great.
So, within the book that I was quoting directly, Ed does get one footnote to a footnote. This song is what guitarist Ed O'Brien once called the best song we've ever recorded.
Yeah.
End quote.
Yeah. The best song we've ever recorded.
Yeah.
The guy on the group project who does nothing but, puts the clear plastic binder on the assignment and goes, "Oh, look."
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a hollow pause after I said that, because what else can you say? Even somebody that has written a doctoral thesis on Radiohead, the only thing he could find regarding Ed O'Brien in this song was a song Ed O'Brien once called the best song we've ever recorded. No follow-up.
Right. A song Ed O'Brien called Good and added, "I was there for."
I think I was taking a shit that day. All right.
All right. So next song on Amnesiac, real departure from what we just heard. This is called Polk/Pole Revolving Doors. Now I'm going to talk more kind of from the beginning on this one. This is, listeners can hear, this is a electronic piece, kind of a Radiohead techno, and then we'll hear there's some auto-tune spoken word going on. A lot of talking about doors in this song. Now, I think this song, there we go. I wanted to get one clean. I think this song has an obvious companion from Kid A, which would be the title track of Kid A.
Which we are now talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Was Kid A amazing, or whatever your name was?
Yeah. Oh, how everything falls into its right place.
Yeah,
now,
I agree.
This is where I was thinking about on the way up here about not wanting to give Amnesiac short shrift by constantly comparing it to Kid A. But I just think there are very obvious kind of echoes where I can't help but think, do I like the Kid A version of this song? And by this song, I mean this type of song, right? So Radiohead, I think, sequenced these albums in a way where they intentionally have these callbacks. And so if Pole Revolving Doors is the Kid A of Amnesiac, then Pyramid Song is the How to Disappear Completely. There's other ones coming up later that I won't get into now. But when I listen to Amnesiac, that's what I kind of go, oh, do I like this or the Kid A version of this song better? Now, this one, I'm going to have to say I prefer the song Kid A
I do as well.
to this song. I still think it's cool, and I still think it's very well placed in this album. Those are kind of my general thoughts about this song. What about you?
I mean,
any interesting trivia or anything you want to say?
No, totally. I definitely agree with comparing it to its companion on Kid A, which would be the title track. I think, to what you said, I think this album, as well as Kid A, is perfectly sequenced. I think this album, it's very intentional in that the placement after Pyramid Song is so smart, because the deformation of the voice gives an immediate meaning to the distorted voice, which like establishes a link between doors that the narrator might be going through, is sort of how I imagine it, right? Like the last line of the song, and you do have to look up the lyrics, it's hard to hear, but the last line of the song is, "And there are trapdoors that you can come back from," which I think implies the protagonist has gone through a trapdoor to a place they can't return from. Maybe technologically, maybe like I'm picturing like Into the Spider-Verse, when you enter this like other dimension or something like that, which is a theme all throughout Amnesiac, like the implementation of technology while simultaneously resenting it. Is one of the ideas I got of it. And the voice alteration via autotune gives a larger meaning to the dehumanization of the narration, which seems to be emanated by a robot, right? That's what it sounds like. And the melodies are really restricted, which I think kind of just goes to that line, which strips them of any human features, which again, after Pyramid Song is such a wise choice. I'm not saying that this song is therefore so fun to listen to and rock out to, but if you choose to examine it at that level, I'm not saying everything I just said is correct. I really, really think it shows what the broader message of Amnesiac might be. Can't get inside their heads, but that's sort of what I got out of it.
I really like that, and I think that it really shows, like, thematically how just there's no wasted space on this record. And I think that Kid A, to put it in really broad terms, I think Kid A might be the record where you're in the fog of depression and in the fog of kind of the anxiety of, like, this modern world, the fog of war a little bit, you know, to kind of, like, hone in on some of the... I'm going to pause. Speaking of the political themes of these two records. And then Amnesiac is kind of like emerging from underground and trying to see, well, what is left of this post-apocalyptic landscape? You know, what am I looking at now? Your head is cleared a little bit. It's a different world, but now you're kind of making your way through it. And did I pull that out of my ass? A little bit, but it's also what Tom York himself said about Amnesiac. And this is a quote that you just reminded me of with the trapdoors. He says, Amnesiac may have been recorded at the same time as Kid A, but it comes from a different place. It sounds like finding an old chest in someone's attic with all these notes and maps and drawings and descriptions of going to a place you cannot remember. And so I just think, it just ties very well into that theme with him talking about, you know, all these trapdoors that you can make your way in and out of.
100%. And I think this is as good a time as any to mention it. Maybe we should have mentioned it up top. Another thing I'm paraphrasing that Tom has said regarding the artwork of this album is that the artwork on the front of Kid A is of an Arctic, maybe barren wasteland, and it's implied. We talked about the climate change, possible climate catastrophe implications with that really red sun. Tom has said that the cover of Amnesiac is "You Are in the Fire," which I think dovetails really nicely with the
and describe the cover. People can look it up, but
for sure, it's very artistically brilliant, but it is very simple. It's I would say about 2/3 of what looks like a red sort of textile fabric background. And then drawn onto it is I can't remember the name of this particular character. I think
the Crying Minotaur.
Crying Minotaur. Thank you. And I've drawn this many times. It's one of the simpler Stanley Donwood characters. And crying, very obvious tears. It's in a very cartoonish style, and then there are very precise geometric shapes sort of surrounding the character. But to what we were just talking about, the red textile does resemble. It is certainly not blood red. It has tinges of orange in it, which I think gives a little bit of credibility to the idea that you're in the fire. And going back to what you were saying, Walker, I know we're both pulling from what Tom said or band members said, but I think those just overlap really nicely. To the extent where there you have the band saying these are related. Here's the continuation. Amnesiac is a continuation of Kid A in the artwork. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also too, like the tears, like, okay, I just said Kid A sounds like a little bit more of being in the fog of depression, and Amnesiac sounds like beginning to be able to emerge out from that and get your bearings. And then the cover has this character crying, which may sound like depression, but I don't think so, because I think depression and kind of the depression that is being explored on Kid A is almost the absence of feeling. I'm not here. This isn't happening. And then on this one, it's like you're feeling your feelings again. There's sadness, there's tears, there's moments of joy, there's moments of anger. I'm not saying those things are not present on Kid A too. It's an album that is full of feeling, but I just think that it's honing in more precisely on different aspects of, you know, the cycle of depression that Tom York was feeling in post OK Computer.
And folks have theorized that the album title Kid A is a reference to what the first human clone is called, which is Kid A. So if that's the case, right or wrong, Amnesiac as a companion to the first clone, or growing up, having your eyes open to the horrors of the world. Again, I think to overuse the word dovetails very nicely with what you just said. That's a feeling I get from this whole album. Is just like your eyes are opened and you're learning to just function in the bullshit minutia that is living in society.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're not filled with rage or hate, well, certainly not. But you still have these feelings of, fuck, I got to do it again.
Right.
Anyways, that's all I
got.
But
right. It's a feeling of, fuck, I got to do it again, but also I'm going to get through this. It sounds like it's like you've kind of like, my eyes are open. Mm-hmm. I see how stupid everything is.
Right.
And how pointless everything is. But I'm embracing that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Which I feel like is kind of always the feeling you get coming out of a depression. Mm-hmm. It's usually not like, oh my God, I realized how hopeful I am about everything. It's like, sure. I realize that even though I'm not particularly hopeful, I still want to be alive.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think we just had our how to disappear completely moment where you blew my mind.
Oh.
If we're talking about companion pieces, that happened in How to Disappear Completely. And I would say the way you just sort of broke down those two things, and that's not to say that it can't be beaten, we're only on track 4.
Yeah. One day we're gonna talk about track 4 too. Thank you. What a lovely thing to say. I appreciate having some insight about something, because when it comes to songs that make a pyramid shape, Zach, it's just not my forte. When it comes to ways that a person can express feeling sad, well, Walker's got you covered. Now, this next song that we're going to play, we're going to talk about it in the background. I'm going to give a little teaser here and say, is this my favorite song on this album? The answer that I will give at the end may surprise you. This is You and Whose Army.
Come on, you think you drive me crazy.
Now, this song is one that takes a long time to fully kick into gear, so we're going to just talk about it while it's playing. Now, this one I read a little bit about last night. This is another one that was, or maybe not another one. This is another one that has a very full band feel. Right now, you might be saying, Walker, all I hear is a vocal and a guitar. Well, just wait, listeners. The other boys are going to step in and pull their weight before too long. This is You and Whose Army. This is, I would say, the most overtly political song on the album. It's directed from the point of view of a totalitarian sounding power saying, do you think you can take us on? If so, you and whose army? Comparing said power to the Holy Roman Empire. Pretty clearly putting the West military industrial complex in its sights. This is as the war on terror, the drums are starting to beat for it, and Radiohead isn't having it. They're seeing it and saying,
but remember, listeners, this came out May 30th, 2001.
Yes, that's
3 months in advance of what was a tragic event that incited a war. And I know you know that, Walker, but it is so interesting to just remember that.
I know it is, because it politically it's such a war on terror, but it just shows Radiohead is like ahead of the zeitgeist.
Yes,
and this is
here we go.
Kicks in. Now, it was the Handsome Man that I read said they pretty much got in a studio and recorded this live. The effect on Tom's vocals, really cool, kind of whispery telephone-y effect, came from them putting egg cartons over the microphone. So they're doing analog stuff in the studio to give it this kind of sound. And
if you think about it in comparison with the title, You and Whose Army? So, the Holy Roman Empire had an army. The army I think of, though, is the United States Army during World War II era, just because of the vocal affectation. Sort of that muffle. You can almost picture it through what was an early record player called?
A phonograph.
You could almost hear a phonograph effect. And
especially on those backing vocals.
Yeah, and just in that intro of the come on, the way it sounds almost muffled, you could almost hear the pops and cracks as if you're listening on vinyl. And I think we kind of focused on the same thing. So I think, again, going back to that counterpoint of whatever previous song, Tom York in particular, I think, establishes an immediate contradiction of the voice alteration heard in the previous two songs, right? Because it's very, very human. So a counterpoint is immediately established within the first 2 seconds of what is clearly human breath. I think it's an inhale, right? I guess maybe it could be an exhale, but it sounds like an inhale. And, other examples of songs, I really had to kind of rack my brain for this, that have done this is Jeff Buckley's cover of Hallelujah, The Beatles, and Taxman. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pink Floyd, Wish You Were Here, and Pink Floyd, Mother.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's just interesting to think of other songs in popular music that have done that. And it's also interesting because we've talked about Pink Floyd quite a bit on this podcast. And where I know the song Lucky, we found like, oh, this sounds like Radiohead by way of Pink Floyd. Certainly Pink Floyd weren't the only other artists to have done that. And I'm probably missing many other examples, but just an interesting parallel. And the second, you already mentioned it, but like the guitar is very cleanly recorded with no distortion. And that's a really interesting choice compared to, right? Like it's just it is Johnny Greenwood just playing it through and very cleanly, and then the piano comes in and disrupts that, but the effect on the guitar never changes.
Yeah. And this is another one that's working in like that jazz mode. They're doing jazzy chords. This is one of the few Radiohead songs I can pretty competently play on the guitar. But even just recently, listeners, I had one chord wrong, which your industrious co-host, Zach Glenn, I saw him playing it, and I was like, uh-oh, I've been playing the wrong chord there. Zach, tell them what that chord is, because I do not know.
It's a jazz chord. The actual name escapes me right now, but
is it a like C sharp plus or something, or
that'd be it's a D sharp augmented, so and then so in that particular portion it's just a D sharp augmented, which is just to say, listeners, like a funky looking jazz chord.
Yeah,
we don't have to get everything right technically.
Well, it's that part with the after you can take us on that.
Yes.
Bing, ding, 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 ding. Yeah. What you wanna do? Now
that's not in the song.
Shall I answer the question that I teased at the beginning? Oh, and also I didn't even realize this, but it's appropriate that I posed a question in this because as you said in our Ben's episode, Radiohead will put punctuation in their songs. They will pose questions to you. That song is called "You and Whose Army?" ? So
nice poll that I don't remember.
Well, I edit the episodes, and it's something that I didn't catch when we were recording it, but I laughed at very hard in editing. Is you go, they will ask
they will ask questions.
They will ask questions in their songs, listeners, which I like because you're kind of like threatening our listeners with.
Yeah.
So to answer my question of is that my favorite song on this album?
Is it your favorite song, Walker?
I'd have to say maybe. I'm actually not sure. All right, listeners. The next song is one that I know Zach has a lot to say about. This is "I Might Be Wrong." Oh, getting back into a little bit of digital town after a.
We're going back to space. Is kind of how I like to think of it.
There you go. Yeah. Very cool noise. This has Ed all over it.
So already,
talk to us, Zach. I know you have a lot to say about
from
this.
a technique perspective, we talked about how in Packed Like Sardines, we have a consistent rhythm going, but with that backbeat and those extra quarter notes, you still keep your foot tapping to the same beat. This time we have it on the guitar. So listeners, you'll notice this riff is very repetitive. It does change in the upcoming chorus, but it starts out with a 1 2 1 2 1 2, and then it goes 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. So yeah, so all
right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's
no, I'm wrong.
Well, I know what you mean. It does do that there, but you're talking about when they slide up to the 8th fret.
Okay.
I don't want to get too much into fret numbers or tuning or whatever. I want to
get into 1 fret number. Don't tease us with fret numbers and then hold it back.
We have another example of it right here with this chorus coming up. If you want to,
sure. Is it that?
Yeah, it's doing the same thing that I was talking about. That's the bass making that. But everything you're saying is right on.
Okay.
What they're doing is they're splitting the beat, right? So we're not changing time signatures, right? You're just adding in an extra beat. And what this does is it really gives a crescendo type build. And that's what's so genius about. That's what good songwriting is, in my opinion. Is you don't have to make something the busiest or the most complex, but when you layer your instruments, or if you do something a little bit different, still in that same mode of repetition, this is a very specific type of brilliant songwriting. It builds in your subconscious. For me, it builds in my chest, and it's like rising and rising and rising, and that's absolutely what's going on in this song. Listen to the bass. Now we got the bass really doing a lot. And tip of the hat to Nigel too, because you'll notice he cuts everything when we go into this chorus right here. We could still hear it, but it was not as busy as it was in the verse.
Yeah, it's cutting the drums just down to the hi-hat. And I think this is one, I'm speculating here, and you can probably tell me if I might be wrong, but I think that this is one where Phil is playing a drum track, but that snare is definitely, he's hitting a sample pad.
Yes. And,
am I right?
Yeah, and we will cover that in our next track, Walker. Zach, for what Phil is doing.
Should I play that?
No, we got to get through this whole version.
All right,
if that's okay.
I jumped the gun there. Now, I just want to say,
I just wanted you to
from a
hold on to
non-technical point of view, just as a fan of this song, I think this is the ultimate melding of the two musical approaches on this album.
Yes.
This has that antiseptic, electronic, kind of cold steel feel.
What a great song that was, right, Walker?
It was really good. It's too bad it's over. Oh, well, what?
Huh? Antiseptic feel.
You know what I'm saying? Like it has that kind of like clinical feel, and it also sounds like them playing in a room.
Yes.
And I think that's a really hard thing to accomplish. You know, I'm sure I said this in the Kid A episode. I'm very rarely happy about it when a rock and roll band that I like goes into their electronic phase.
Sure.
Radiohead is really the only band that I like where I like that mode as much, where I like Packed Like Sardines as much as I like electioneering.
I've been thinking that exact thought nonstop.
And this is both. This song really has both.
This song is both, and if we could just, before we go into the next one, just pause it for a quick second. We're going to go into vulnerable territory again. So maybe not vulnerable, just this is so subjective. But so that song is I Might Be Wrong. I've mentioned it on previous episodes. It's obviously very near and dear to me.
If you're following us on Instagram, you've seen Zach play it very proficiently on the guitar.
Well, thank you. So the feeling, these are abstract, but that evokes for me with that song, you mentioned kind of spacey electronic. I forget the words you used with that opening kind of intro.
I think I said the word antiseptic about 5 times.
So what that very first chunk before Johnny's guitar comes in reminds me of what it must be like to be in the womb. It's very, very spacey. You can only hear these sort of muted. And by being in the womb, I don't mean like, when you're the size of a pea. I mean right before you come out. And you're just getting these impressions of the world around you. It reminds me of, once you're out of the womb, your first awareness of human suffering. you know, I don't want to go into that too much, but I think we all have that moment. For some people, it's at 12, 6. Some people, it's at 24, depending on what kind of life you led. You do have a moment, most people do, where you see that your world is not everyone else's world. And depending on all kinds of shit, sometimes that comes a lot earlier for other people. I can't quite explain why, but I think just the title alone, I might be wrong. That was a moment for me, thinking that it's a mantra I repeat almost every day when I have a knee-jerk reaction to something is, hey, I could be incorrect, sometimes with more success than others. And it also, so, my next point was if first feelings of doubt in the worldview given to you and the level of unease this can cause. That song is very uneasy. All of the studio version.
It's like being introduced to a new perspective that is making you question some assumptions that you have.
Exactly.
And it's capturing that feeling of discomfort.
Totally. And I mean, in hindsight, my co-host here was on a wonderful podcast called Growing Up Christian, in which I think he distilled the jarring effects of that, but also in a way that was very relatable, right? In that it's rarely pleasant when you have those moments, whether it rocks your worldview, maybe you, authority figures in your life are not happy that you have had a change of heart. Regardless, though, that's what that song reminds me of is I might be wrong. And then sort of that chorus of let's go down the waterfall, have ourselves a good time. It's nothing at all. It feels like the youthful optimism of, maybe a first date or a first relationship. And the song we're about to play, the way I sort of think of it is a second half, but for me, it was in my 20s. Maybe for other people, it's a little bit older. The chaos and the darkness and the rawness of it are repeating those same motifs, but you've been burned a couple times. And we can go ahead and cue it up now. And this also, is another example of where I think Radiohead, I don't know if it was conscious or not, they don't care really what people think. They make great music. And I don't know if it's that people thought, kept saying, oh, your favorite band is now digital. Well, I think Radiohead said, okay, fuck you, because this is that same song played live, same year.
Yeah. A few things that you're saying are bringing stuff up for me. I mean, first of all, the last thing you said about Radiohead subverting the expectations of what it means for a rock band to go digital, so to speak. It reminds me of kind of like what Kanye West did with auto-tune on 808s and Heartbreak, where you take this thing that is just being used and used and used, just overused and is draining popular music of kind of its individuality.
Yes.
It's making everything sound like
makes you feel like an old man too. Like Drake is popular,
right? It's just like when you just hear like something becomes a trend and it starts out as cool and interesting and new, and then everybody's doing it. Like grunge or something. It's just like it becomes really samey and boring. And then there's still artists that are able to capture an overused technique or technology, sound, whatever, style of song. And because they are so unique, nothing that they do sounds normal, right? Kanye West, like I said, is one of those artists where he's taking this auto-tune convention that's really popular in rap at that time. I think it was around 2008 that album came out.
Oh, okay.
Of people kind of these verses that they used to rap, they're kind of like freestyle singing over an auto-tune, but because it's Kanye West and he's a bizarre artist, it still comes out completely unique to him. Radiohead, same thing with what they're doing with like, people are kind of experimenting in this mode of going electronic, but they can't help it. They couldn't sound the same if they wanted to. Prince writing a song like Purple Rain and then saying later, oh, this was me writing a country western song. And okay, I know the chords of that song, so I kind of get where he started, but I don't think he took, I feel like that was him going, this is literally what I think that is, but because I'm Prince, it comes out sounding like nothing you've ever heard before. And even if I'm trying to write a stock country song.
Well, and in the case of Prince, and I think, sometimes in the case of Radiohead as well, it shows you maybe it doesn't show you, it gives you a peek behind the curtain of how a genius's mind functions, where they might take in information of country song and that is the product. You can kind of reconcile the two of them, but it's like country filtered through Prince is country I want to listen to. and you know, I just think that that's a really, really nice parallel because, this is what I was going to say with Pyramid Song. I think Pyramid Song sounds a little bit like Radiohead by way of Led Zeppelin. And
okay.
I think there's one other song in Radiohead's catalog that sounds that way. It's on an album we've not gotten to yet, so we won't talk about it.
The vocal melody, I definitely
very Robert
really
Plant.
hear that.
That's so we're staying in the mode of I might be wrong. Do you mind if I take over the controls because I do have a few timestamps I want to stop it at? Or
sure.
Okay.
Now, but real quickly, I just wanted to comment on one other thing you said, which was the youthful optimism of the lyrics about "Let's go down the water slide." Oh, I'm sorry, the waterfall. For some reason, I always change it to a slide. For Radiohead's talking about the natural splendor of a waterfall, and I'm like, can we go to a water park? And that's why I am not as good as Radiohead. No, but like those somewhat optimistic lyrics. With the unnerving nature of the music. I had not thought of this until you were pointing that out, but it's really an interesting inversion of what they've done so much on OK Computer, where they take these mundane or quote unquote happy sounding things and fill them with deep sadness. They take happy sounding music and then put very sad lyrics over
Let Down.
Let Down, no surprises. Both very, like, by Radiohead standards, both very pretty and upbeat sounding songs, but the lyrics are just like a knife in the gut. And this is kind of the opposite. It's taking these kind of like buoyant sounding ideas. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. Fuck it. Well, life's a good time, and then putting this really sinister sounding music under it. It's just really interesting.
No, it's a departure.
I never thought
regard,
of this song in that way.
And the original inspiration for this song was Tom was walking on a beach by his home, and looked from the beach, looked towards his home, and thought that he saw a ghost. And, Tom York, per his own admission, is not a believer in spirits or ghosts. But because he said it was so vivid and that's what he saw, that was the inspiration for this song. I don't know that it guided the rest of the lyrical content, but I'm sure listeners were anxious for us to get that through. So this is...
now, you want to talk about the live version of this song, right?
Yeah, so what we're about to play is the live version. It was originally recorded in Oxford in the month of July 2001. And it is from the I Might Be Wrong live album, where most of the other songs were played live in Paris, but this was played in Oxford.
And all the songs on that live album are Kid A and Amnesia songs or B-sides.
Yes.
There's one song on there that did not make either album.
So just to reinforce again, listeners, everything I said about the vibes that first one gives me is youthful optimism. This is, to me, reminds me of repeating those same mantras, but with having been burnt. Is the best way I can put it. So here we go.
Do you think those cheering sounds are Ed being like...
We're going to get to Ed on this live
version. You guys are doing a great job.
That is Tom on the tambourine, listeners. You heard it in the intro there. We'll hear it again. So it is important to note there's essentially one guitar player on this song because Ed does have a guitar, and the additions that we'll cover towards the end of the song are essential to this rendition, but they don't involve him helping with the riff, which is going to blow your mind in a minute when you hear what Johnny Greenwood is doing because Tom is playing the tambourine. So there's one guitar player on this song.
And the percussion approach is different here in this live version. Phil is hitting a acoustic snare instead of a sample pad. So the whole thing is harder, faster, more direct, I would say.
Sure, but we'll hear in a moment that Phil does have a sample pad. It's really hard to hear in this mix.
Okay.
And I'll tell you when it's coming. Okay, listeners, get ready to hear Phil's sample pad.
Oh, that 1, 2.
Okay,
Cool.
here's it. Okay, we're a minute 47 in. Listen to what that dry strum.
Is that Ed?
That's Ed, and it's essential. Like, the song would not be the
Also,
same without
Colin
that.
is just fucking kicking
Okay.
ass over there.
Johnny Greenwood adding more in the beat there. In fact, if I could just rewind it just a little bit. So to right here, listeners, Johnny Greenwood adds essentially double time.
Oh,
Yes.
does it do that in the studio version?
No, this is all additional. And now Ed is all the way up at the 15th fret doing the harmonics.
Now Zach is fully rocking out, listeners.
Yeah.
Now I can turn it up if there are specific parts you want to point out, but I'd like to hear you commentate a little bit on just why are you?
Well, right here,
so-
Ed is now all the way shredding on the. I guess it'd be the A sharp or B flat. Oh, and Johnny just did the double time again, but that's okay.
Good to go.
Let's. So there's a lyrical addition right here. Waves come out and go in again. This is not in the studio version.
Oh, really?
The waves come out, go in again, come in again.
Interesting.
Okay, this is different right here. Johnny Greenwood's going 870 570 3535 87. Guys, this to me is what being in a band is. Everyone is doing so. Oh my God.
Right, and it just doesn't work without one of the parts as well.
No, and you know, I love to have our fun with Ed, but and this end is amazing. But
Yeah,
we did let a lot of that song play.
Let's.
Okay.
This is cool.
Okay, so I was the main thing and you so graciously passed over the controls to me, and yeah, that's a very important song to me. The lyrical addition of "Waves Come Out and Come In Again." You know, it's always hard with Tom York to tell precisely what he might be saying, but to me, you know, I recently read the Stephen King novel Misery for the first time this year.
Oh,
and
I know where you're
in
going with
Misery,
this.
you know, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. Another inspired artist that, you know, whatever, very prolific. And one of the things I think he's so brilliant at is painting pictures of something like pain or heartbreak or whatever. And in the novel Misery, the way he describes his pain and the pain being quelled from a pill addiction he eventually forms is the tide coming in and the tide going out. And, you know, I don't pretend to think at all that Tom York was drawing upon that, but to me, that's sort of the analogy and sticking with my sort of narrative of I might be wrong in the studio is like this sort of optimism of sure, we'll get married. Things will be great, you know, or whatever, you know, you're just your general optimism. And then this one, The waves come out and they come in again. I just picture just like, fuck, I got to do it again. Maybe folks that have been through a cycle of bad relationships. Let's go down on the waterfall. You're just exhausted, but you have to keep that optimism if you're going to try it again.
Yeah.
Have ourselves a good time. So ultimate lesson, and it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And, we talked a lot about Johnny Greenwood adding in those fourth and fifth beats. And that Ed is essential to the percussive aspects. I would really, really encourage listeners to go onto YouTube and look up I Might Be Wrong Live 2001. There's a version of them in Paris and a version on Jules Holland, almost identical to this version. You really, really get a chance to see what a band fucking at their peak looks like. And that's all I got.
And it's also worth saying, too, that this is also the phase in Radiohead's career when they're playing these songs live where Tom has stepped into his own as a frontman. And, Radiohead, they're not, it's not like Queen in an arena. That's not their focus, is stage presence, I wouldn't say. But this is where Tom starts dancing, and he's front and center, and he's
got a lot of girlfriends to talk to after this type of moment.
Yeah. He's not wishing it was the 60s anymore because things are going just fine for old Tommy Tom, old Tomcat, as we call him. In 2001. I think he was in a relationship at this time and through most of their career remaining.
To your point, though, he looks so fucking cool. I mean, he's embraced himself.
This is where he comes out. He's comfortable with the weirdness. He's not disguising his voice. He's not trying to dance in a way that a sex symbol would dance. He's dancing the way that he would dance, and it's cool and it works and it fits the music. And I mean, people are always at their best when they're comfortable in their own skin, no matter how odd you are. If you are really comfortable with it and you convey that in your performance, people are okay with it. It's why like comedians can be, if Stephen Wright can kill because he's comfortable with what he's doing. It doesn't matter that he's this disheveled
George
bald
Carlin
dude.
would be maybe like a comedian if we're talking Tom York to comedians. I mean, George Carlin is famous for he would improvise a dance move, sort of in rhythm. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And someone absolutely confident and comfortable in their own skin, and there's some sort of sex appeal to when a person finally embraces that. And with Freddie Mercury, that's a hilarious example because I would argue, and I think this is what you're saying, Freddie Mercury was so comfortable in his own skin. He just happened to be an athletic showman.
Yes.
And so people then trying to imitate that, it doesn't necessarily work. And I think it took the Kid A sort of Amnesiac period, ironically, which is one of the more electronic, maybe digitized eras of Radiohead, for them to become the most human.
Yes.
Mic dropped.
Ah, absolutely. Wow, that was really good. Too bad that we have to keep talking because that would have been a great thing to close on. Just kidding, listeners. We're going to say so much more cool shit. All right, shall we go to the next song?
Yes, I'm ready.
So that was I Might Be Wrong, both the studio and live version. Getting back to the studio tracks on Amnesiac. Next, we have what was the second single of the album. This is Knives Out. Now, this is a song Radiohead wrote about a movie that would come out in 2019, directed by Ryan Johnson.
Let's write a similarly okay song.
Okay, so
I found that movie to be very overrated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But you also... I'm going to just cut to the quick here. You just called this song only okay?
No. I think that this song has
we're
moments...
obviously we're talking
No.
relative
I
to
gotcha.
Radiohead terms.
I gotcha. I think our Radiohead cred is at full throttle.
We like this band.
I think I always think of that this song took 312 hours to record, which is it worked out to about a year in the studio, and not every day coming and playing Knives Out, but I weirdly think you can hear that it's there's a hilarious movie, Dewey Cox, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story.
Oh yeah,
and I think what it geniusly demonstrates, this is my favorite part of the song, is that when you work on a magnum opus too long, it can often become something that just can't live up to the expectation of either the creator or the consumers. I think Avatar by James Cameron is an example of that. I think Gangs of New York by Martin Scorsese. I don't really know a musical example, but this is just not the standout song on the album to me. It's interesting.
I think a musical example, a song that like this song I also love, but no one would call this among the best Beatles songs, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. That's one. I love that song.
Do you want to play Maxwell's Silver Hammer again? The way George asks, he's still trying to be sincere and get back at that point, but it's like, no, you don't want to fucking play that shit.
Right. Like, it's like...
Paul's granny shit.
Yeah, right. It's funny. Like, again, I actually really like that song.
Yes.
But it's funny for that to be the song
Yes.
that drove the band crazy
Yes.
trying to get it
Agreed.
right. When you're like, this is perhaps one of the more slight contributions of what is my favorite Beatles album. So I think every song is an A+.
I think that's a wonderful comparison, and I think that there's that was one of the moments of Get Back that I really enjoyed, was because you've always heard the quote from John, Beatles fans, that's Paul's granny shit, along with Obla Di Obla Da.
Another one that it took them like 70,000 hours to get
And those
correct.
are songs that are maybe a little bit on the silly side. This is not a Beatles podcast, but hey, they are the Mount Rushmore of bands.
Of four guys.
But I think you
Zach,
what?
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
please.
if Radiohead was on Mount Rushmore, someone would have to get left off. Only four heads.
Tom.
It's just four Eds.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Twist. It's 4 Eds.
Sorry, you were saying.
I was just extending your point already. Just that those are great songs, Maxwell Silverhammer and Obla Di Obla Da. But I could see becoming sick of them immediately. I could see becoming sick of them if I were playing them over and over, especially because they're in that sillier vein. This is totally different than that, but it is repetitive. It seems maddeningly complex from a percussive standpoint, and it's just not a standout.
I feel similarly. So this is an interesting song to me because it's one that every time I hear it, I'm into it, but it's a song I never go out of my way to hear. When I listen to Amnesiac, it is mostly with no skips and all in one sequence because I have analog vinyl copies of all the Radiohead albums. But Radiohead is an album... Sorry. But Radiohead is a band I also put on in the car a lot from my phone. And Amnesiac is an album I listen to a lot, but I wouldn't say it's the one that I put on outside of the house the most. I listen to it a lot on the record, and it's so perfectly sequenced. There's never a moment where I'm like, oh, I wish I could skip past this song. The songs that if I am just listening to Radiohead in general in the car, and I'm like, ooh, now I want to hear this song, and I'm going to Amnesiac, it's going to be Packed Like Sardines, it's going to be You and Whose Army, and it's going to be I Might Be Wrong. I love all the other songs. Those are just the ones that it's like, if I only got time to take a quick dip in the Amnesiac pool, I want to listen to those. So, Knives Out, not my favorite song. Always really happy to hear it when it's in sequence. I will say we are now in a section of the album that Knives Out represents the start of for me. These next 3 songs to me feel very tied to each other, and it is my least favorite section of the album.
Yeah.
And on that, we can play it in the background. The next song is an alternate version of Morning Bell, a song that is on Kid A, and there is this different version of. Apparently, there were several versions of it. I think it's really cool that they have a different version of the same song on both albums. I think it sounds very, very well sequenced with what we just heard, Knives Out. Having said that, I am not a huge fan of this version of Morning Bell.
It is so interesting that they decided to include this. You know, I believe Kid A, is 10 tracks long.
10. It's 11 if you count the untitled track.
Let's not count that.
Okay.
And OK Computer is 10 tracks long. Amnesiac is 11 tracks long. It's so interesting that they decided to include an alternate version of a song that we got previously on the previous album. You know, it's certainly not a better version. It is different. It's more, for me, it's a little bit darker. So during the section changes, I think it just has a more minor flavor to it, or melancholy flavor to it. I happen to really like this version. I totally agree with you. It's inferior to the Kid A version, which I think is just refined to perfection. And I love this part. And I'm talking, when I say this part, I mean unique to the Amnesiac version. But I think you lose a little bit of the... Morning Bell is in 5-time on Kid A. I think you lose a little bit of the magic by slowing it down this much, to where it's maybe a little easier to track with and becomes a little bit boring.
Yeah, I think it loses a little bit of its like sense of urgency that that the first one has, which gives it that kind of like the first Morning Bell when it's in a quick looped 5-time drum beat from Phil doing that roll. Yeah. And he's saying, "Where'd you park the car?" It's like, oh, this conveys that like sense of stress that this whole album is conveying really well. And this one just is just a little bit of a dirge to me. And I want to be very clear.
I like Radiohead.
Not only do I like Radiohead, I like every song on this album a lot. So the ones that I'm saying I'm not as into, I'm not as into these songs on one of my favorite Radiohead albums. I don't want to try to quantify my order of albums at this point. I do think that's something that we will lay out at the end, but I do know that Amnesiac is certainly in the top 50% of their albums for me, probably in the top 25% of their albums for me.
Okay.
So I really like every single song. That last one, this one, and this next one that I'm going to play, again, all very coherent together. Zach, this is my least favorite song on the album. This is Dollars and Cents.
Interesting. I prefer Dollars and Cents to, even though I had quite a bit to say about Pull Revolving Doors, since this is sort of in that mode, I would say I actually prefer this song to the sort of non-traditional musical renderings, I guess, would maybe be the group of songs that this and then Hunting Bears fall into. I don't love this song, but compared the two.
I don't know if okay, well, if we're going to put it up against Revolving Doors, that's tough. I guess I think of this one as a little more of a song than Revolving Doors, so I'm kind of thinking of
that's very true.
The songs as we traditionally think of songs. This is my least favorite. I think that this one, in terms of like kind of if it has an echo from Kid A, I would probably compare it the most closely to In Limbo.
Oh, interesting, because I think that Knives Out is the closest to In Limbo.
I could see that. I think of Knives Out as a little more of this album's Optimistic, because it's the closest to a full band playing for the whole song arrangement. You know, even though it's weirder than Optimistic, it's a kind of traditional rock and roll song. But I buy that too. I could compare.
I think it's just the downward melody that the guitar is playing in Knives Out, and then in Limbo as well. You can tell how engaged we are by the song walker that we're talking about other songs already.
Right, totally. I mean, I guess the reason I compared it to In Limbo is because it's a song that doesn't have a super clear melody, but has a ton of really interesting stuff going on.
The drums are spectacular.
The drums are spectacular, and it's one of those things where the way the drums are playing against the vocal melody, it makes it sound rhythmically a lot more complex than it actually is. Anyway, I guess now I'm feeling a little bad because I compared it to In Limbo to compare it unfavorably. If this is this album's In Limbo, this is one where I very much prefer the Kid A version of this moment.
Do you know what it reminds me of?
But I do really like this part a lot.
I
where
do
the
too.
two vocal parts are going and it's getting all intense.
This is kind of, we said in the opening
it's only
episode.
half over, Zach, this song.
That's okay. My point's only just begun.
No, I meant now I'm turning on the song again a little bit because I thought it was reaching its climax and it's only half over.
Well, and that's something they've done to great effect in a lot of the songs. I would say You and Whose Army, and I might be wrong. You think that they've climaxed. Same with Just. Same with... Anyways. In this case, maybe it works against it a little bit. But what this reminds me of with Tom York's vocal and sort of chaotic affectation and picking his spots is... I guess I would say when comedians or actors do impressions of Tom York, of which there are some funny ones, Fred Armisen, who I know is a huge fan of Radiohead. So, but there's a SNL skit from, I think it was 2011, of duets with Michael Bublé for Christmas songs.
Oh, I have to see this.
It's so funny, and it's Michael Bublé himself going and a Mary, and then it'll be like Taylor Swift and I can't remember.
It's one of those sketches though where it's just a loose premise for everyone to get to do every impression that they have.
And
those are some
Jimmy
of the best.
Fallon is terrific in it. A person who I do not find funny.
His musical impressions are really good.
Oh my God, he does a Sting. So it's Michael Bublé with Sting. It's so funny, and then it's Michael Bublé with Tom York, and Fred Armisen plays him. His physical mimic, and it's a caricature, so it stings a little bit. But then I know Fred Armisen is actually a really talented musician himself and has great musical taste, and it does sting a little bit because it's your favorite. But it's like, hey, who cares? There's funny, and but the vocals that he's impersonating are the kind of like, and you're like, that's not what Radiohead is. But you're like, there are some Radiohead songs where he does that.
Yeah,
and this is one of them.
Fair enough. That's
Hilarious
I gotta watch
skit.
that.
Kristen Wiig plays Taylor Swift, and she is so goddamn brilliant.
That was a great cast. That was a good time in
Yeah.
SNL history.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so that was that.
Oh,
Do
it's
you-
over?
Do you agree with me though that is it's like a oh, I know what word it's like a suite. It's like a movement on the album, I would say, is Knives Out, the Amnesiac version of Morning Bell, and Dollars and Cents.
Yeah.
Like sonically, they're very, very tied to each other in a way that I think is really cool. But I think it's like the most cohesive part of the album that also represents kind of the sleepiest part of the album for me.
Oh, I don't know about the most cohesive, because I think You and Whose Army, Pull, and I'm sorry, I have the order wrong, but the 3 tracks ended with I Might Be Wrong. I think that's a suite and a chunk in itself, stylistically, and I think that this one would be inferior.
I think that's a good point. Now, what we're hearing in the background, listeners, is Hunting Bears. This is it's not terribly short. It's about a little over 2 minutes long. Instrumental track.
I really like this one.
I really, really, really like this song.
Okay. Man, you had me on pins and needles there.
No,
It's like,
well,
where's it going?
I just wanted to kind of say I feel like I'm
and you hate bears too, right? Is that
I
part of
hate
it?
bears, and
Yeah.
so seeing them hunted to extinction, which is, I think, given Radiohead's messages in other songs, it's weird that they're like about like save the planet
But
and
fuck
no
bears,
war,
yeah?
but like kill all bears.
Especially
Radiohead,
those polar bears, yeah?
yeah, Radiohead is like, we were actually. It's interesting because a bear wandered into the studio while we were recording this, and then Ed, of all fucking people, took his guitar. It took an E string, a low E string, tied it like a garret, and choked that bloody bear out.
Strangest thing, yeah, he had an orgasm while he did it.
Oh my god!
Took us to a whole other level there.
Oh my god, that's really funny though, because if somebody in the band is a serial killer, I would definitely say it's going to be Ed.
Interesting, okay.
Tom is too obvious.
I would go Johnny, unfortunately. Even though I'm not creeped out by Johnny the slightest. But
Zach.
What? Walker?
Johnny Greenwood looks like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Around the mouth, for sure, yeah.
And the big eyes.
Yeah, and also, too, Jeffrey Dahmer was blonde, I suppose, but he could grow his hair into a similar hair texture, I guess.
Well, and
How many times has hair come up on this podcast?
I don't know. It's I don't know if there's a ton to say about that song, except it sounds like a Greenwood composition.
Sure.
On the guitar, really cool bit of interstitial music that to me has an obvious echo on Kid A. It's the tree fingers of this album.
That's very generous of you to. I mean, that song is 1,000 times cooler than Tree Fingers.
Well, but still,
Yeah, agreed. Totally.
it is the tree fingers of this
Absolutely.
album because it is a ambient instrumental piece of music.
Sure, totally.
That is not a song in the strict sense of the word. You already said it. This is one where I very much prefer this moment on Amnesiac.
Yeah.
Hunting Bears is a much cooler song than Tree Fingers. And again, God, I feel bad that I'm bashing Ed so much, but I think it's because this is a Johnny Greenwood joint and Tree Fingers is an Ed joint, as
Absolutely.
we found out.
And I want to be sensitive to time here, but I do want to point out that Hunting Bears is a song form that Radiohead will come to use to great effect, in my opinion, on future albums. And in that it's a through composed song form. So through composition is a song that has an A, a B, a C, and a D, and an E section. It doesn't have to go that many letters, but an A, B, C even, where no sections repeat.
Oh, cool.
So an example of this would be I Will, or 2 + 2 = 5 is in through composed form. That one actually is A through E. And so even though that's an instrumental piece, and you could say, okay, well, that's not... Just take note of that, listeners, because Radiohead were taking note of it and saying, hey, can we do this with a full song with vocals and a lot of different parts? So through composition, very, very interesting.
Oh,
Again,
cool.
Want to cite Mr. Osborne there, Brad Osborne.
Well, in sensitivity to time, we only have 2 songs left on this album, and this next one is a little something that I like to call like spinning plates. Learned some pretty interesting trivia about this song. What's that?
Are we at hour number 2?
Oh, buddy, we are at almost hour number 3. That's okay. There's a lot to cover in this one, and by now we also we have our listeners. Our listeners are deep into the catalog with us. This is our 9th episode. Zach,
it is interesting though that Amnesia. I mean, I definitely front loaded the history and the data, but I think Kid A we really had a lot to say and moved quickly. I would not have expected Amnesiac to have represented this amount of time.
I thought it would, because I knew that in kind of covering Amnesiac that we would be covering Kid A again in a certain way. We're kind of having to go back over that ground, and that's okay. We don't leave stones unturned on this podcast.
Well, how about you want to compromise and let a little bit of vocals come through here, and then we go ahead to the Why Us version?
Sure.
For this song? Again, listeners, this would be another example of Radiohead...
I'll skip ahead.
Radiohead being satisfied with the studio version that's rather restrained, and then showing you what they can do with an alternate version, which I think Walker will play here in a minute.
So I just want to hear a little bit of his vocals. So, some interesting trivia about this song.
Hit me.
First of all, Tom sang the words backwards, and then they played it backwards, which is why he sounds like the little person in Twin Peaks who says that gum you like is going to come back into style. The music was originally a version of a song that we're going to hear later. I'm not going to play that now.
Sure.
But there's a song that comes up on their next album called I Will. I just learned this yesterday. Zach may have known this for a long time, but this was them messing with an early version of that song. Didn't go anywhere, wasn't the feel they wanted. They looped the music backwards and then made this song off of it, which is really cool. When you hear I Will on the next album, it could not sound less like what we're listening to now.
However, if you examine the chord progression, you could see that it does work in a circular motion. And I did know that, and I alluded to it on our Kid A episode where I said we were talking about the alternate perspective, that digital rendering and trickery isn't real music, and how ignorant that might be. So ignorant, in fact, because by not going anywhere with I Will and playing it backwards, they came up with this song, which, I like this version. The version that we'll hear a minute of in a second is absolutely brilliant. One of my favorite Radiohead songs of all time. Not saying it's top 10. I'm not that finite, but it's so touching. And it just goes to show you that fucking about with technology doesn't mean that you've stripped yourself of any level of humanity.
So yeah, I will play a little bit. So as you heard, that last version, we hear some of the same.
We still get a lot of that
this synth noises. Now, I gotta say that last version, the studio version of Spinning Plates, is one of the songs that I didn't think about much in earlier years of my Radiohead fandom. I'm not going to say it's my favorite or anything like that, but it is one that I think is really, really, really cool and really well placed on the album, especially when we hear the note they take us out on. Now, this other version
So do you like this?
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
Okay.
This is one where I really just appreciate the different versions, and I don't think that they should have. I think they made the right call with which version they put on the album. I also think they made the right version to play it like this live, because this is how it sounds live: is Tom on a piano.
Yeah, if we can get through the first, what would traditionally be thought of as a chorus. Again, this song has no chorus.
Do you mind if I skip ahead to that?
No, please do. Perfect. I have,
Here we go.
We're nearing a vocal peak for me. And you can kind of hear, if you read the lyrics, which the lyrics of the song, listeners, are touching, heartbreaking, beautiful, like most Radiohead songs. However, if you really, if you just leave it playing for just a minute, but like, you could hear that they are derived from something playing backwards. And, you know, there are other bands that have done this. The Beatles famously did it with, on Revolver. Tomorrow Never Knows?
I'm Only Sleeping as the backwards guitar solo.
Yes, yeah. And Walker, here is my hot take on Amnesiac. Not any of the other hot takes I've already had. Particularly with this version, you think about the year that this album was released, and you think about what other bands were rising to prominence from the UK. This is the most Muse-sounding Radiohead song ever. And granted, Muse's best album, in my opinion, Absolution, came out in 2003. Origin of Symmetry came out same year as this, so Radiohead obviously got there first, and I think Muse have some very good albums in their early career. I have not kept up with them lately, and what I've heard, I'm not impressed by. However, I think this is the only time on this album in this era where you can maybe hear a little bit of complementary, possible mimicry going in both directions, and a little peek into next week's episode. If I'm allowed to do so, I think that Hail to the Thief represents the only Radiohead album where they are potentially consciously competing with other artists that sound like them.
Interesting.
And that's not, but yeah, even this piano line and how it changes and the sort of echoey falsetto, very Matt Bellamy, who's an amazing singer and musician himself.
Yes, but I think that it shows. I don't want to get into You said,
I wanted to keep that short.
No, you said it
please,
well.
please.
I don't want to be too negative. I think that because I think I like the same Muse stuff that you do.
Absolutely.
Where we differ slightly is the album that I think is their best album is Origins of Symmetry.
Oh, okay.
And Absolution is actually where there's songs I like, but where it starts to lose me a little bit.
Totally.
I think that Muse shows the limits of mimicry. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that they don't do their own thing, but it's like the singer is an amazing singer. The musicianship is really good, but it's got to come from that real raw place where it's like Radiohead are obviously crazily accomplished as musicians, but I think what makes them our favorite band is the emotion, the sort of je ne sais quoi of like where the writing is coming from. It's like it's like, you know, the soul part is not something that you can manufacture.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not just boring music being well played.
Yeah, and the political anthemic sort of anger is definitely a theme that Muse has relied upon, and that's certainly reminiscent of Radiohead. It is overwritten and pretty dorky, I would say, in Muse. this is not an anti-Muse podcast, and I think I should have let Walker just put a pin on it there because that was very well said. But mimicry has its limitations, right? They're imitating the political despondency, and you're just like, okay, God. But are we at our climax?
We're at the last song of the album.
Well, don't throw stones, ladies and gentlemen.
Honestly, we shouldn't. I've tried to do the joke you just did, except for, hey, when it comes to making fun of Muse, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Yeah.
I wonder what it would be like to live life in a glass house. Boys, hit it.
Oh, pretty
It's
weird.
funny to say
so
hit
far.
it, and then it's like a weird ambient sound.
So, right away, Christos Ponderecki, composer who Johnny Greenwood cites as one of his primary influence from a film composition. I think you can 1,000% hear that influence in the intro to what is a sort of New Orleans jazz funeral dirge.
Yeah.
But just with that opening sort of ambient texture is very Penderecki.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
It's just what I hear. I
Well-
don't know that that's correct.
It's funny that you say that this is sounds like a New Orleans funeral dirge. This is a collaboration with a full band. This is the Humphrey Littleton Band playing that you can hear clarinets,
A lot of
saxophone.
woodwind and brass.
trumpet. And according to Humphrey Littleton, the song starts with an ad-libbed, bluesy, minor key meandering, then it gradually gets so that we're sort of playing real wild, primitive New Orleans blues stuff. Now, I got to tell you, the other quote I saw from this guy, I don't think that he had a great time working with Radiohead.
Interesting. I have not heard this, so please enlighten me.
I wish I could.
He's like, fucking Ed, man. He's such a dick.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is funny. So, for the final track, Life in a Glass House, Johnny Greenwood wrote to the jazz trumpeter Humphrey Littleton explaining that Radiohead were a bit stuck. Littleton agreed to perform on the song with his band after his daughter showed him Radiohead's OK Computer, which is great. I love that. According to Littleton,
yes, dude. That is so cool.
this is funny. So, according to Littleton, Radiohead didn't want it to sound like a slick studio production, but a slightly exploratory thing of people playing as if they didn't have it all planned in advance. The song was recorded over 7 hours and left Littleton exhausted. This is a quote. I detected some sort of eye rolling at the start of the session, as if to say we were miles apart. They went through quite a few nervous breakdowns during the course of it all, just through trying to explain to us what they wanted.
Okay.
So
I think that's. I'm really glad that
it doesn't sound dismissive of the results, but
Totally.
it doesn't sound like it was a fun process for.
No,
the
but I'm very grateful that you
Humphrey
dove into
Littleton
the
band.
why of it, and that it didn't sound like mistreatment or that they were butting heads. But I think when a band doesn't have well, that's not a good example. I was going to say it doesn't have a George Martin, but they have Nigel. But what they're trying to convey is so abstract and bonkers of we don't want it to sound good. In a way, Walker, it circles back to our point that when people say it's like jazz is total bullshit, because jazz is highly organized, and they were telling them, hey, don't be organized. We want it to sound chaotic. To a professional musician, you're like, okay, well, I can't unlearn how to be structured and organized.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I get it.
And it's also just, too, like, it's like bringing other people in who don't share this sibling language of the band is probably really
Right.
hard. Like, Tom doesn't read music, but him and Johnny have been making music together since they were teens.
Yeah.
So they know
That-
how to communicate ideas to
Magic.
each other, and then
Magic.
you bring some other guy in, and it's like Humphrey is like, "What's up with these? What's up with these Krauts? They're not German. Why did I say Krauts?
What's up with these?
Let's listen to this
Yeah, we got my favorite part
clarinet
coming
solo
up, too.
going on here, or trumpet, rather." I adore this song.
I love this song, and listeners didn't come to this podcast to hear Walker and I sing over what I would think would be our favorite band. This is a very, very fun song for vocal exercises. There's a really gorgeous harmony that you can find in the chorus. You have that's one of the things. We haven't really talked too much about the vocals on this album, but I think Tom York's vibrato and his head resonance in this album, is spectacular, and it allows for On You and Whose Army, I Might Be Wrong, Life in a Glass House. There's some really good opportunities to train your voice for harmony. And, that's been my experience, but I would encourage listeners to do the same.
That's Amnesiac. What do you think, Zach? Good or bad?
I forgot it all. I know.
Oh my God.
What?
I forgot to press record.
I forgot to tell
these
you,
are jokes about amnesia. The condition this album is named after.
I forgot to tell you that the band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, does a very famous cover of Life in the Glass House.
Really?
I'm not messing around.
I can't imagine that being good.
Well, okay, fair point. But can you imagine them covering any other Radiohead song? I think it makes complete sense. Forget Anthony Kiedis, Walker. Just push him out of your mind. Flea, John Frusciante, Chad Smith. This is totally right up their alley.
I don't like it.
All right. Okay.
I don't want.
Okay.
Red Hot Chili Peppers need to stay out of Radiohead's business.
Interesting trivia nonetheless.
It is. I appreciate you sharing it, but I'm not very open to whatever that sounds like, I gotta say.
So that was Amnesiac.
I put this among their best work. It may sound like I was getting a little nitpicky with certain parts of it.
A little cunty.
It's a little bit cunty in some of the details. Don't get cute, as the Sopranos would caution us. But I really, really love this album. I listen to it a lot. I think it is probably the densest material for me that Radiohead has in terms of, like, I'm still kind of, how do I put this? By the next time I listen to this, I might be like, oh, I was missing it with Dollars and Cents. You know, it's just an album that songs that did not make a huge impression on me years ago when I started listening to it still are standing out to me years later. Like I said, like that album version of like Spinning Plates, I always thought it was cool or like, oh, that's interesting. But now I really, really appreciate it. I really, really appreciate its placement on the album. They knew what they were doing, and I'm not really here to quibble with it because I think that this is an album that, what did Tom say about it? That it's like you're finding a bunch of maps and charts that you don't know where they go.
I think I'm still...
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I might still, all these years later, be like, oh, it turns out I was holding this chart upside down. And I want to keep listening to it and keep getting into it because it's just not an album I've gotten sick of, and it's an album that has only grown in my esteem year after year. What are your final thoughts?
No
on
attempt
it?
at humor. It is an album I think that is oft forgot, and I think that, like Pyramid Song, when you're a genius and when you're in that mode and in a group, there, some things are going to be accidental. I don't know if they were like, let's make Kid A, yeah, and then called it Amnesiac because people will forget it, and it's brilliant. I don't think that's how geniuses work. I don't have anything to add to what you just said. I mean, I've said it before. I think the mark of great art, not by my definition, but by any person's, is something that you can come back to and find new meaning in. And, I think that I'm paraphrasing. That's kind of what I got out of what you said. And I love this album. Walker, I know we're at 3 hours. We can cut this if you like. I would like to quickly ask you a question first.
Please.
All right. So we're going to break some rules here because we are going to mention future albums only in name, no other details. I would like to tell you at the start of this podcast what my favorite Radiohead albums were in order of favorite to least favorite. And I would like to tell you only up to Amnesiac what my favorites are at this point. So we're not going to cover future albums yet.
Yeah, that sounds great. We can. I don't think we should say what our favorites are after this, but I would rank.
Can I tell you though what my favorites were in January? Including ones that come after this, but okay. Yes. Okay, here we go. Zach's favorites, listeners. Walker can attest. This is dated 1/31/22.
I'm looking at the date, listeners. He's not lying.
Is there 31 days in January?
And there's a picture of him holding that list and that day's newspaper, so that you know.
And a dead bear's head. We went bear hunting that weekend. All right, Zach's favorites as of January 2022. Number 1. Hail to the goddamn thief. Number 2, okay, computer. Number 3, In Rainbows. Number 4, Amnesiac. Number 5, The Bends. Number 6, Kid A.
Whoa.
Just let me get through. Number 7, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Number 8, King of Limbs. Number 9, Pablo Honey. I would like
You
to say...
thought you liked the Bends more than Kid A that recently?
I did. And because...
Or maybe you still think that. I don't even know.
I would like to tell you my favorite Radiohead albums in order of my, top down. Only through Amnesiac as of now, which is September of 2022. Kid A, Amnesiac, OK Computer, The Bends, Pablo Honey. It's my favorite is now Kid A. Right below that is Amnesiac. Below that is OK
Out of what
Computer.
we've listened to.
Out of what we listened to. I don't know that my former favorite, Hail to the Thief, I don't know where that'll rank after we listen to it. That's how awesome of an experience this has been, is the amount that I'm willing to delve into and things that have opened up my mind and spoke to me has completely changed in this project.
I think
you don't have to say you're saying, but that
I think that is beautiful.
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing it with me. At the same time, I wish I could have amnesia and forget that you just told me that there was a time very recently, Zach Glenn, who I do a Radiohead podcast with, who I happen to like a lot, who I like and did not think was a sick freak.
Total dumbass.
I'm going to drop the bit now because that's really interesting. I think that as much as I prickle at the idea of preferring the Bends to Kid A, it also is like, how much of that is just the conventional wisdom about what we have kind of absorbed to be the most important of Radiohead's work? And how much does that say about Radiohead that you can be a fan as avidly as you are for this long and still find such unearthed treasures in albums that you thought you knew back and forth?
Yeah.
And I am really, really curious to, and also, I guess I kind of had the opposite thing where the Bends really raised in my esteem from us doing this podcast about it. So it's going to be really interesting to see where all these things fall at the end of this project. And by really interesting, I mean to us.
And our listeners,
yes,
who will hopefully be leaving us coherent, positive, or even, if it just makes sense in your review, if it's a low star ranking. That's all
and also
like
listen to the podcast.
Listen to the
before you
podcast.
review it.
All 4.5 hours of it.
Zach, do you have any other closing thoughts?
Thank you for going on this journey with me. Love you, listeners. Love you, brother.
I love you too, and I love you, listeners. Which Radiohead song would you like me to take us out on?
Let's go ahead and go with Anyone Can Play Guitar, Please. My favorite Radiohead song of all time.
All right, listeners, this is Anyone Can Play Guitar by Radiohead. Thanks for listening.
It's just one of those days where you don't want to wake
Never
up.
fails.
Every time Zach hears the opening notes of something I say is Radiohead, it's the grimace on his face. It's really sad. Did I genuinely get you again? Or were you playing along to be nice?
I was not playing along, I promise. It's all about the he said, she said.
Bullshit! All right, listeners.
I think I like Amnesiac.
Better than Kid with a fat lip.
All right, bye.
All right, listeners. Love you. Bye. Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. And thanks for listening to